morning, everyone, and welcome back to the OpenShift Coffee Break. Good morning to my dear friends, Jan Lawson and Jafar Karib. Good morning, guys. We can hear you, Jafar.
Hey, good morning.
Oh, okay. And mainly, good morning or good night, given the fact that it's. Can you remind me the time? 3:50 in the morning, Paul?
It is 4:02 in the morning.
Oh, 4:02, so it's not that early. Okay.
4:02, and it's great to be here this morning with you guys.
So really, I appreciate the fact, Paul, you are here. Paul Smith from Sonatype, and that means that you're very passionate about us, about Red Hat. So thanks.
That is taking one for the team. That really is.
And so I think it's definitely the time to have some coffee.
I just finished mine, so
you're already on the second round. Okay. So, Paul, I don't want to take much time to your session, and usually I like to start with the what we are going to talk today, and then why are you here? And I understand that asking this very early in the morning could be tough, but yeah.
Sure. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to focus on a joint solution created by Red Hat and Sonatype around generating SBOM, software bill of materials, throughout OpenShift pipelines. And then we're going to expand the conversation into a broader topic of securing and managing your supply chain for your modern software factory, which is based, of course, on the OpenShift platform. So that'll be the discussion topic for this morning.
Cool. And if just a few words about the why this topic is so relevant.
Sure, and we'll get into that. But really, the reason is we've got the EU Cyber Resilience Act over there. Over here in North America or in the United States, we have an executive order where your companies are not going to have a choice, right? It's going to be the same as a food label. You're going to be governed. You're going to have to provide bill of materials for what you're delivering to government organizations, and of course, this is going to have widespread effects out into the commercial organizations as well. So you're going to have to do it. So that's why we're here to discuss that both Sonatype and Red Hat with OpenShift is prepared to provide that for their clients today.
Yeah, this matter is becoming very important also in Europe because I think there are a lot of regulation coming in the next years that will have a strong impact mainly on the industry like FSCI, where bank and insurance need to provide prove that the digital services they are going to deliver comply with some regulations. So yes, definitely it's not only for the USA, but also for European community, UK. So that's very important. Jan, do you have something to
add?
Yeah,
I work with a number of customers that this is incredibly important for the traceability of the source material and the traceability of the actual components. So, but my interest in this is slightly different because I just want to see quicker Maven builds because I'm tired of seeing demos and watching Maven download the entire internet. So that's my interest, but please carry on the SBOM stuff.
So Paul,
and we are going to cover a little bit of that as well. So
cool. So Paul, I'll leave the stage to you. Do you want to share something?
Yes, and I'll be sharing. We'll go through a few slides, and then I'll stop sharing, take some questions, and then we'll share again, and I'll actually show you working product. So we'll actually see what we talk about.
Cool.
So let me go ahead and share my presentation here.
Please
tell me if you can see it.
Yeah, we can.
All right, great. So first off, just a brief introduction on myself. My name again is Paul Smith. I'm a sales engineer for Sonatype. I'm really excited to be here this morning and discuss this joint solution and the broader subject of how we secure our supply chain for our modern software factory. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So a little bit of history about Sonatype. We've been contributors to the open source community for a few decades now. We contributed to Apache Maven. We are the stewards of Maven Central. And this is important because it gives us incredible insight in how developers use open source. Our software has been certified on our Department of Defense's Platform 1. We actually have an air-gapped deployment option. So just to give you a little bit of background, we've been doing this for quite some time, and we're really happy to share with you this morning. So let's get into the subject at hand. What is an SBOM? So this is very wordy. You can see over here on the right, a formal record containing the details of supply chain relationships of various components used in building software. You'll also see a little segment over here on the left that I pulled from a European paper. And like I said, these are going to be mandated. So companies are not going to have a choice. They're going to have to provide transparency into the products that they're building and what they're delivering to their clients. And great news is today, Red Hat OpenShift clients have easy access and ability to provide software bill of materials for what they are building today. But let's make it a little bit easier, right? What we're really talking about is a food label, right? So we can't go to a grocery store and buy anything without having the food label on the back of the jar or the box. And the reason that is, right, is that we have to have transparency in what we're going to consume in our bodies. And so it's the same thing with a software bill of materials. There's two prevalent standards for a software bill of material out there today. SPDX, they focus more on legal and license compliance. Cyclone DX, which is what we've adopted, is more focused on the vulnerabilities in our bill of materials. So why do we need these things? Why are we being mandated to provide these? Well, if there's a mandate, we have to comply. So compliance is the first checkbox that we get for our software factory. The other benefit from a software bill of materials is it gives you transparency. Transparency leads to automation, and then, of course, remediation. So software bill of materials are very, very important today. Another really important question, and this is what we're going to kind of focus on today, and when I demonstrate the technology, is what do I do with SBOM? So, SBOM is really becoming an overhyped acronym these days, and a lot of our clients they hear it, but they really don't know. Okay, what do I do with it? So there's really three use cases around dealing with SBOMs. The first is consumption. So how do I receive an SBOM based on that bill of materials? How do I identify and act to vulnerable data, and how I can do this based on my enterprise or my organizational policies. The second use case we'll talk about is actually generating. So today with this solution, OpenShift clients can generate the SBOMs. We'll do this automatically, and this is what we'll see in the demo today. And then the third use case is, how do I store and manage these SBOMs? So there can be a case to store these next to your binaries and artifacts in a repository. Cyclone DX is coming out with an SBOM exchange server, so we could use that. Or another one that I've started to jointly work on with the Red Hat team is Ansible. So, how do I push an SBOM into an automation platform such as Ansible, so that I can maybe sign it, maybe store it in a vault, a number of automated things that I can do with the SBOM. If you look on the left side here, Sonatype has been a very active participant in the Cyclone DX SBOM specification and development. We've actually been supporting SBOMs for a little while now, kind of before the market started being pushed that way. We can, anything that we scan or look at, we can generate and export our SBOMs. We have APIs where you can grab those, and also we can consume SBOMs. And then there's some links here to the executive order, the Cyber Resilience Act that I spoke about, some best practices around zero-day vulnerabilities, and a really neat little tool that we've made available to the public called the Bomb Doctor, so you can get quick and immediate input about how your SBOM looks and what vulnerabilities are there. So let's talk about the securing your software supply chain in OpenShift. So I'm going to introduce you here to the Nexus Platform. There's basically 3 products in our platform. The repository, in fact, a lot of people say, oh, they're the repository company. So we first came out with an open source Nexus repository about 10 years ago. We actually have a pro version, but it's just that, right? It's a repository where we can manage our libraries and build artifacts. We were talking earlier about how do I make my Maven builds faster. The first place you want to start is with a repository, so a cache and proxy system. The next capability in the platform I want to talk about is Nexus Firewall. So Nexus Firewall, essentially in a nutshell, it prevents OSS malware, right? So it never lets any of the open source malware, and there's more and more of those nefarious people out there pushing open source malware. We stop it at the front gates of your cluster. So your OpenShift customers can rest assured that, based on their policy, no developers are going to be able to pull in, OSS malware into your software fabric.
That's a great point. The fact that obviously the repository, it's a key element, key tool for in a software development lifecycle. But this Nexus Firewall, I think, is really an interesting concept. The fact that you allows to take control of really what is going to be released in an environment that could be an OpenShift cluster. Because open source is a great, open source frameworks are great, obviously, but that great freedom needs also great responsibility, as always. So the fact that you have something that you can leverage on in order to implement this sort of responsibility is great.
That's right. I mean, look, again, we can set policy, and we'll see this in the demo, so that at least you can ensure that the really, really bad things out there aren't going to be pulled into your organization, right? We've got, in some cases, thousands of developers at our client sites pulling open source software in, and again, if you use a repository along with Firewall, I mean, really every client out there, every organization should own Firewall. And I will say we are the only ones that actually have this capability today. There is no competition for Nexus Firewall. And then lastly, and this is really the brunt of our SBOM solution, is our Lifecycle product. So Lifecycle is meant to identify, detect, vulnerabilities in your open source usage, provide remediation for that, it's actionable across the entire SDLC, right? From source to your build to your release, and even out to production, right? So we have an SBOM. What we do is we like to continuously monitor those key SBOM applications because we say, you know, open source ages more like milk than wine. And then the last piece there is the intelligence. You know, a lot of people will label us in the security space. I really think we're in the intelligence space. The Nexus platform is really providing intelligence around open source so that we can empower developers to use open source more efficiently and more securely to deliver innovation out to the business. And now our solution and what we did, right? So we took lifecycle, and again, if you look at a pipeline that's going to come through the OpenShift factory, again, we talked, you know, we've got these untrusted bits and bytes on the left. First thing we want to do is want to cache and proxy those untrusted bits and bytes at open source and our repository. And of course, we're going to use Firewall again to keep all of the bad malware out of our pipeline right from the beginning. If you go to a military base, right, the first thing you have to go through is that outside gate. You know, they search under the car, pop the hood, all of those things. That's what Firewall is going to do for us, right? No one's going to get past that gate that has some nefarious intention. And once we've pulled it in, now with our builds, we can pull from our repository. We will scan your project, your applications with lifecycle at every stage of the SDLC and generate a software bill of materials all the way out to the end. And that's what we'll see today. This last slide here, we'll hand out the slides to anyone who's interested. This is really just a cheat sheet that kind of gives you a bulletized list of the capabilities that this solution will bring to your OpenShift clients.
I'll say, can I ask a very quick question before we go on to the demo?
Yes. I wanted to stop here and just take questions if there are any, and then we'll actually get into the demonstration.
Yeah. So from a developer perspective, I say that I mean from my perspective. Can you give me a quick overview on what we have in terms of the currency? So when you talk about the SBOM itself compared to what, for example, Nexus stores, what's the one-to-one match between the SBOM and the actual artifacts within the Nexus side? And how is that actually maintained? Because that's very important, isn't it, to actually lock the actual artifact components into the SBOM itself?
That great question. So when Lifecycle scans a project, we walk the directory structure. So we're walking the entire directory structure, and we're actually we call it advanced binary fingerprinting. But we're basically taking a hash of the open source artifact. So we walk that complete tree. We do a hash of the binaries that are actually in your project, right? A lot of times you look at the manifest, you know, what we think's in it. Oftentimes what we think is in our project really isn't in it when we do a build. You'll be surprised from what you had, you know, what you're saying in your pom.xml or your package.json. When you actually do the build and the install, there might be a different set of artifacts in there. So we're actually looking at the binaries, artifacts themselves, and taking a fingerprint. Again, this is intellectual property. It's a key differentiator for Red Hat OpenShift clients, right? Because again, without accuracy of data, you can't automate, right? When you have bad data, your pipeline shuts down because we got to figure out, you know, where did it go wrong. But you know, if we have accurate data, then we can improve our automation. Again, we are providing actionable intelligence around the usage of open source. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
All right. Anything else, or should we look at a little bit of product here?
Yeah, so I have few questions, but I'll defer them after the demo. But I think it's really interesting to see basically how you can generate the SBOMs, and what would be interesting if we can talk about that afterwards is how you make use of the SBOMs afterwards for like traceability, for auditability, and things like that. So after everything has been generated, how do we make sure that whatever we created hasn't been tampered with and such things? So,
sure. And those are great questions. So we'll let's see. Are you guys seeing my my demo environment here?
Yes,
yep.
green light. You can move forward.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. So I want to start. This was a question earlier, right? Again, and this is the beauty of this, is that this is easy. We've made it easy for OpenShift clients because we have operators. There are other we have certified containers. We have operators. We're delivering Helm charts. But of course, operators are the easiest ways to get started here. A few clicks, you actually have this capability up and running. So you'll see here we have Nexus IQ operator. This particular operator supports both Firewall and Lifecycle. And of course, we have our repository operator that supports our Nexus repository manager. Right? And what we've done here is we created a pipeline. I can show you real quick. It's a very simple pipeline, but we're doing a clone. I believe we're cloning a WebGoat. We're doing a Maven build of that. And then we're doing a scan, right? So that scan is where we're going to generate our SBOM. If we look at this run here, and I look at the logs, you can see that we did the clone, the build, and we did our lifecycle scan where we generated this report URL. Okay. Now, if I go to that report URL, so we've generated this SBOM. You can see here that we can actually pull down a PDF, or we can pull down the Cyclone DX SBOM. We could pull that SBOM from API. So there are a number of different ways to grab that SBOM for additional or further usage. But today that pipeline actually builds this software bill of materials. So if we come in here and just take a look, we'll get things like a dependency tree. So, sometimes we'll see, and this again goes back to our conversation about us being able to walk that directory structure. And you'll see some of these are like 4 or 5 levels deep, where we might have a vulnerability. If we look at this report, we can, let's see, we'll pick one here. You can see we'll tell you if it's transitive, whether it's direct. We'll even tell you where we found it. We'll give you policy violations. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so you can see what policy we've violated. You can see the CVE. And here's another big advantage or differentiator for Lifecycle, is that if you just went to the CVE, this is what you would get. You would get this description from the CVE. What Sonatype does with that intelligence platform is that we go after, we use AI and machine learning to pull in from about 130 different data sources. And we filter that into our data research team. Our data research team adds the rest of this. So we'll add explanations, we'll provide code snippets, but we're complementing what you would normally find out there in like an NVD. In fact, NVD makes up, I think, only about 30% of the actual data that we have stored in our catalog around our open source binaries and artifacts. Right? So we look at the security. We'll also look look at the licenses, what's the effective, what's the declared, what's the observed license. So all of that information is contained in this software bill of materials.
Very easy question. In case of any violation, is there a way to fire an alarm and send out to some control plan or a monitoring tool for that customer usually have in place?
Sure. And that's a beautiful segue. It's almost like we've done this a few times together. So everything is done through policy, right? Lifecycle is a policy enforcement engine. So if we look, let's look at a couple policies here. So we can have our own application categories, but here's a security critical policy. All right. And so let's examine policy again. We're going to create this policy that says, okay, this is a 10, right? This is the bad stuff. We don't want to let this move through our pipeline. And so we have these constraints. Basically, we're creating the conditions upon which we would trigger a violation of this particular policy. In this case, we say if the vulnerability severity is greater than equal to 9. You can see here we can do things on age, on hygiene, integrity, license. So your policies can be based around legal, it can be based around architecture, it can be based around, of course, security and vulnerabilities. So we build this policy out, right? And if there's a violation, and then you remember I said that we actually provide actionable intelligence across the SDLC. So here's the actions, right? So if I get the really bad stuff in my application or my project, what do I want to do at each stage of my SDLC? Well, here you'll see proxy. Remember Firewall? That is Firewall, right? So this is where, this component would not even come into my pipeline, right? Because I would fail it as I pulled it down, right? So if you're trying to do a Maven build and you're trying to pull this component in, your build is not going to go well because we're not going to allow you to pull that in. Now, usually for developers and for build stages, we do warns because developers don't like tools breaking their builds. That's just how it is, right? But we want to give developers warnings to say, hey, there's some potentially bad stuff that you're sending through this pipeline. And by the way, in stage release and operate, it's not going to make it out. So we're not going to break your build, but we're going to warn you that, you're going to have to change this. So no build break, but you'll still have to do something. You'll still have to address it. And then the last point here is who or what should I notify, right? So it could be a specific email. It could be a specific role that you're assigned through LDAP, or it could be a webhook. So maybe one of the things I want to do when I get a particular policy violation, maybe I want to use a webhook and call out to Ansible, my automation platform, and have, XYZ done, depending on, what policy and what I want enforced. So I think that addresses the questions you just had. So yes, it's all customizable. We ship with, I think, I don't know, it's like 25 or so policies out of the box. And again, it's all customizable. Okay. What actions you want to take are based on the organization's policies.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, Zhang, thanks. This is really interesting. And I have a follow-up question on that. So the fact that you are able to store all the libraries and all the dependencies in your repository, that gives you, I would say, real awareness of the ecosystem of your applications. So say, for instance, we have detected that there's a vulnerability on a specific library. Do you have a way to map that to the actual applications that use them, or maybe even to, in our case, say we are using those libraries in container images, is there a way to, I'm speaking from a remediation standpoint.
Yes.
Is that something that we can find, or?
Yes, excellent question. So let's just take a real life incident, right? It happened in December of 2021, a little thing called Log4j. I'm sure everyone is familiar, right?
Sure.
So, so we actually had that in our catalog, I think within an hour or two of when it was actually recognized. So if you were one of our clients and you come into this dashboard, and this is just one way, remember the other way is as soon as it gets in our catalog, if you, and we'll get to this, if you are continuously monitoring it, I'll actually show you here. So let's look at this. If you are continuously monitoring your SBOM, there it is. All right. Then here, right, we could say we want to, you know, more likely we're going to continuously monitor release, right? So as soon as that Log4j update hit our catalog and you're doing continuous monitoring, you're now going to violate a policy. And so your policy enforcement springs into action, right? So it's gonna make the email notification, the role notification, or send it to, you know, a system. The other thing is on our dashboard here, when I look at the components that are in use, here's the Log4j 2.7. I'm pretty sure that has violations. It will give me all of the applications across the enterprise and give me the risk breakdown based on that component in those applications. So here's the really great thing. Log4j was a non-event for our clients. And that's an incredible statement. If you think about how many people, in fact, you know, again, it goes back to us being, you know, the stewards of Maven Central. We still see about 30% of the downloads of Log4j are vulnerable versions of Log4j. So there are organizations that still haven't fixed this issue, right? They're still in their CI/CDs moving forward. So it's just incredible. But for our clients, Log4j was a non-event, which is really incredible.
Yeah.
So
thanks for showing that.
Yeah, no worries. Great questions, by the way. Keep them coming.
Sure.
So I want to get back to we talked about, you know, the cache and proxy and making our builds faster. And I don't want to download the entire internet every time I do a build. So let's shift a little bit towards. And again, you could see that this is you know, our operator running in our cluster here, OpenShift cluster. Let's just talk about repository manager real quick, right? So there are 3 types of repositories that you can have. One is a proxy, right? So the proxy, and you can see here, let me go back here. So you can see I'm actually pointing to the NPM, you know, or this could be Maven Central. But what I would do is all my development tooling would actually point to my NPM proxy. And so let's say you're doing your build is going to go to NPM proxy, and it's going to pull from proxy. If it's already cached here, right, you don't have to go out to the internet. We've already pulled that into our repository. So this is where all your development toolings are typically pointed at, or our proxy, because we're a proxy for some public repository. Then we have a hosted capability. The hosted capability, that's where like we want to put our artifacts after the builds, right? And then we can put groups. So maybe I have like 4 or 5 proxy repositories, and I don't want, you know, when you're running your build, I don't want to have you to go to 5 different repositories. So I can group those all in one. So you'll search across those repositories for your build artifacts. And then the other thing I want to bring up here, if you look on the very far right here, this is Firewall at work. So Firewall has, when I did a npm install, it tried to pull in all these artifacts. You can see I've actually got some quarantined. I've got these alerts here. All of this is based on component, right? So we can't tell you, where in your code we found it, because it's all the components coming into the repository manager, where with Lifecycle, we're actually examining your application. So those are the differences between Firewall, looking at just the components that we're pulling into our factory, and we're going to stop all the bad ones, all that malware, where Lifecycle is being used across the SDLC to examine and detect OSS usage in your application, so that we can tell you where we found it, and all that information of what you're pushing through your pipelines. Also wanted to let you know, we oh, that's right, all of this information, in fact, let me just go ahead and pause for a second. Any questions up to this point? Are there any questions in the chat or anything?
I'll have a few questions, but they are a bit specific. So, as you know, Red Hat is also working on DevSecUps patterns to showcase some best practices around making your software supply chain more secure and trusted, I would say. And so one of the key questions there is, what do we do with the SBOM? So we see that you can have like the nice UI to navigate with that. You showed that you can also generate it in a Cyclone DX format. I think there's also different formats, SPDX as well, or if I'm correct. But okay, say you have generated an SBOM. So first thing, is it stored within the application repository, or do you store it in Nexus? And the other question is, how do you use that later in the life cycles? So say you have built your SBOM from the source code, right? Now your binaries or your Java application gets embedded in a container image, okay? This container image is in turn going to be deployed somewhere at a later stage. So first, is there, I would say, something that allows you to compare the container image with the source code to say, this is what we were supposed to have from the source code perspective. This is the SBOM that comes with it. Do you also generate SBOM based on container images? And maybe if you are using container images that in turn use some dependencies that do not come from the code, but come from other layers of the container image, do you like give a summary of that? And do you compare those to say, there's a mismatch between what the application was supposed to bring and the actual binary that we have in the container image that should be matching? So
wow, so there's a lot to unpack in that, but great questions, right? You're what you're really getting at is a holistic solution around what gets deployed into production.
Correct.
So what we've looked at today is around the application and the open source usage in an application. We also have the ability to scan an image and get those container vulnerabilities, just like the application. We can get that as well. Now the application, once you've got the application and you're going to release that, or you're going to put that in your image and deploy it, right? That's why the SBOM is important, right? Because at that release point, you want the software bill of materials. And what I'm going to do is continuously monitor that software bill of materials, right? I could also take the SBOM for your container, right? And continuously monitor those, so that if something in that image that you've deployed ages like milk, right? It's gone sour. That the same things can be done for the container. Now, I also know you guys have ACS, right? So ACS is an ability to also scan, and you can generate an SBOM, and we can consume that SBOM, right? So Red Hat OpenShift has the solutions. Whether you want to use us to scan containers, or you want to use ACS or Claire, there's some open source tooling. It doesn't matter, right? We're able to consume those SBOMs. We're able to tie those to your application SBOM. So it's a holistic solution for a software factory powered by OpenShift. Great questions, though. When I was putting this together, again, I'm conscious of ACS and your ability, and ACS moves into production as well, right? So you're actually monitoring ingress and egress of what's going in and out of your pods, and those kinds of things as well. So again, if I'm looking at an OpenShift software factory, and I know I can create a holistic software bill of materials for the container, for the application, and then I can still apply runtime security in production. I think OpenShift provides a pretty good platform for a modern software factory.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I was not really referring to the ACS capabilities, but that you're absolutely right. They can play hand in hand together and provide complementary features. But I was really looking into, so if you think about things like Recore, I don't know if you're familiar with these notions of transparency log, where you say basically we have done a couple things in our pipeline, and how do we make sure that what we have in the end, what we are trying to deploy, is actually what we have built. And one of the principles is that you are going, for example, to sign the artifacts and be able to verify those artifacts later on in the stages, to say, yes, those artifacts that we produced, whether it be the binaries or the container images, or even the YAML files, are exactly what we have built, and it's not somebody who dropped them somewhere in between and is trying to compromise the environments where we are running the applications. And so it was more towards, can we, for example, hash that SBOM, sign it, store it somewhere, and once we do the deployment, use the SBOM to verify its trustworthiness or something like that.
So all of that is doable, yes. If you remember the slide, right? So when we do that directory, when we crawl across that directory tree, we'll generate that SBOM. What you want to do with it is what your organization policy is, right? Yes, you could store it in our repository manager next to your artifacts, and I actually think that's probably a good idea, or at least one. But like you said, maybe I want to sign it, right? Store it in a vault somewhere. Maybe that's repository manager, so somewhere else, a more secure vault, and use it to do some comparison. I look at that as where Ansible can play a big role for OpenShift clients, right? Because it's an automation platform. So I can trigger Ansible, and Ansible could sign that SBOM, put it in the vault, deliver it, however you want to do it. And what you were talking about is, we won't say that, hey, your SBOM back here in development had XYZ, and now you're releasing this stuff, and now it has WYZ.
Yes, exactly.
All we care about is the moment in time that we inspect what you're delivering. So again, if you remember the buckets where I went from source to develop to build to release to operate, well, certainly I want to, when I'm getting ready to push this thing in deployment, that's where I want to do another scan, right? I want to do another inspection. We won't be able to say, look, you were using this component back then, and now you're using a different component or a different version maybe, right? Mm-hmm. But what we will be able to tell you is if there's any bad stuff in what you're about ready to push out into production, which is really what we want, right? We really just don't want bad stuff to go out into production, and that's what we bring to the table. But yes, go ahead.
Yes. So yeah, go ahead. And I was going to say, from the automation standpoint, you are providing APIs, for example, that allow you to pull the data for the SBOMs or things like that to be able to use that in an automation framework. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, that's that whole policy enforcement engine, right? It's really it's automating our pipelines, right? But again, you can't automate unless your data is good, right? That intelligence needs to be good, just like anything, right? If you take any security measurements, the intelligence we pull in affects the decisions we can make. And if we know it's accurate, then we can automate those decisions, which is exactly what Lifecycle does for OpenShift clients. There was one last thing I wanted to share with the team. I want to really quickly, let's see if I can.
I say while you're doing that, I'd like to say I really like the analogy of the calories and the food count and stuff. Does that mean I should use less fat jars going forward?
You know, that's you know, an organizational policy, right? You know, there are what we don't do is tell you, you know, your best practices of coding. What we promise is anything you put in your fat jar or your skinny jar that is bad for you, we're going to identify that.
So I really like the analogy of you know, milk, aging, and wine, which makes perfect sense for the components. We're gonna reuse that definitely.
Yeah, I'll tell you, for me, I mean, what I picked up in the last kind of 20 minutes or so is it's all down to temporal stamping. Is that something to be aware of? That anything you get generated in an SBOM is going to be temporally stamped.
That's right. That's a very accurate statement. I mean, it's a moment in time.
Yeah.
And Log4j, right? When those applications were pushed into production, there were no vulnerabilities. And then December 2021, guess what? And so there was a mad scramble for those people that don't have tooling, such as what Lifecycle provides, right? Because, you know, just doing the inventory of who used those components across a large organization is just incredible. The amount of time and effort, and of course that leads to dollars to remediate those things, where, you know, tooling that either gives you notification or you can quickly find where those artifacts are, you know, it's a big savings.
So I would have a final question, and I'm sorry. So this is a topic that is very close to my heart because I'm working on the DevSecUps patterns, so that's very useful information for me as well. So two questions. First one is, does the SBOM you generate have metadata information about, for example, the application release? Because obviously these are things that you store in the Nexus repository. You say this is going to be cut for release 2.7 of the application, not speaking about the components, for example. Do you transfer those metadata information to the SBOMs as well? So you have an ID of this SBOM corresponds to this specific release of my application or things like that?
There is some metadata. You can set up additional metadata inside of your policy enforcement engine to do that. You know, we will provide, you know, basically the coordinates or the PURL for your components. We'll also provide vulnerabilities. Now, we said, you know, we just talked about these being a moment in time. I have some clients that don't want the vulnerabilities in an SBOM. I have clients that want the vulnerabilities in an SBOM. But since we're talking JSON and XML, another thing that Ansible could do, right? I don't want the vulnerabilities in my SBOM. Well, you know what? I'm going to do, what is it, JQ or, you know, XSLT, I think. And, you know, I'm just going to get what I have. And then that's what I'm going to monitor, continuously monitor, because I don't care about the vulnerabilities in a moment in time.
Okay.
I just want to know, where, if I got bad stuff or not. So all of that is doable. And also, I'll bring to you, I don't know why I can't get my VS Code and share that. I've tried it, but we also have plugins to all of the IDEs, right? So what you could do is basically put a bill of materials right at the fingers of your developers, so that they can actually see as they're developing in their IDE, what OSS vulnerabilities that they might be working with, and there's some ability to migrate or change, like the pom.xml if it's a direct dependency. But everything you saw in that SBOM and that report I showed today is available in your IDEs. It's available in all of your builds, right? So we saw today we've got an OpenShift pipeline which is based on Tecton. By the way, we're the only vendor in this space that actually has a Tecton approved task. So you can go to the Tecton hub and type in Nexus or Sonatype, and you'll be able to find that. I've created some videos showing how to set this up, but I'm pretty sure the Red Hat folks are pretty adept at setting up OpenShift pipelines, probably better than myself.
Yeah, and so this is really useful, because the pattern that we are actually working on, so the next iteration is to actually try to embed the SBOM generation from Sonatype. So that's, I would say, a very nice iteration that we will add in there to present the joint, I would say, value proposition of OpenShift with Sonatype.
That's right. I mean, what we're doing is we're jointly providing our clients with the most secure modern software factory there is today, right? I mean, that's why you would choose that's why I would choose OpenShift over Kubernetes, right? Because there's a lot of security built into the OpenShift platform that I don't have to manually do, right? So it's lower TCO. Now we've got operators that secure and manage our supply chain and their usage of open source, right? Again, click, lower TCO, works together. And I look at things, I try to make things simple. I worked in a manufacturing plant. In that plant, we had a paint shop, we had a weld shop, we had a wood shop, we had a urethane shop, we had assembly lines. So when you're creating this factory, everything's not in OpenShift, right? It has to be those ecosystems, those factory parts brought in there to give the whole software factory.
Right.
And together, I really think we've got a great joint solution for our clients.
Paul, just briefly, if we still have some minutes left, regarding deployment options, in your experience, which is the best way to deploy your components, just on big installations, on OpenShift Hub, managing all the different clusters, OpenShift cluster around, could be, I'm thinking about a multi-cloud situation context, or just having a small light installation for every cluster, OpenShift cluster, a company is delivering, kept in sync in some way. I don't know if this question doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it does. So all you just need this platform, the Nexus platform, in a cluster, and all other clusters can run through it, right? It's just where you're pointing to, right? So I can have 20 clusters all pulling from the cache and proxy of the Nexus repository manager, all being, protected by Firewall from OSS malware. And look, I know you guys go to clients where not all their applications are on OpenShift. Eventually, we would like them to get there. But we're also going to be able to provide security and support for those applications that are outside of the OpenShift software factory and pipeline. So you could get into architectural discussions around how many the more important questions are how many applications, how many scans are you doing,
okay.
What's your usage of APIs, those kinds of things to understand where and how we would want to scale the Nexus platform. But if you think about it, if you think like lifecycle, we walk the directory tree, create the hashes. That's not a lot of heavy lifting, right? So when we get those hashes, we're pushing those back to our hosted data service, right, where our data catalog is, and that's where all the crunching and the work goes. So it's a highly scalable solution. I mean, we've got clients doing thousands of applications in an instance of lifecycle.
Okay, so still 2 minutes left. So probably we can give some minutes back to Paul, and I don't know if it will be the start of your day. You're coming back to relax some minutes more, some hours more before.
I mean, has the sun come up yet?
Yeah, I'm seeing the sun, right? So probably. Still not. So
no, it's still not up. But I think breakfast is 8:30, so I got a few hours, So
to relax.
Again, okay. I get up early. This is no problem. In fact, really excited. I believe in this solution. I worked with a gentleman, Bill Bensing. He has since left Red Hat, but you guys might be familiar with him.
Oh yeah, I used to work with Bill almost every week on those topics, and actually I'm gonna be picking up on those topics, so I might reach out to you later on.
Would love to discuss anytime. I do have some colleagues across the pond on your side that we can connect you with. Where maybe I don't have to get up at 4 a.m. But
definitely.
but sure. I mean, look forward to the partnership, the relationship. We do have an advanced partnership arrangement with you guys, so. And I think all the business check marks are there and aligned. And again, I believe in this solution. I believe in the modern software factory, and I believe that basing it on containerization and OpenShift is a great way to go and quickly get clients there to DevSecUps.
Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot, really, and thanks Jafar and Jan for joining as a co-host. And Paul, I think we can reconvene soon as we do have some advance in this very interesting topic, so we can host you again. For all attendees, let's meet in 2 weeks again. OpenShift Coffee Break on Wednesday, 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. if you stay in the UK. So have a great day. Let's see soon. Ciao.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.